They told you that being kind was the right thing, that being helpful would make you needed, that being there for others was the formula for building strong relationships and being loved. And so you grew up believing that constant presence, emotional availability, and the effort to please were the keys to being recognized. But over time, something stopped making sense. Where was the promised respect? Why, despite everything you gave, did you still feel invisible? Why did the people who received the most from you walk away the fastest? The truth is harsh. The world does not value giving when it is constant and comes without demands. What is abundant is taken for granted, and without realizing it, you became part of the scenery. Present, yes, but invisible. Modern society runs on a silent emotional economy, and like any economy, it works under a perverse logic. Value lies in what is scarce, not in what is plentiful. When you give endlessly, without pause, without measure, you lose your rarity. And what is not rare does not generate impact. It's not that your kindness lacks value. It's the way you give it that devalues it. Imagine a diamond given away every day. Is it still a diamond, or does it become just routine? Being good, when you don't know how to regulate that goodness, makes you predictable. And predictable things are easily replaced. In a world that idolizes novelty, emotional intensity, and mystery, you, with your consistency, tenderness, and unconditional giving, became an emotional object without surprise. And here is where the conflict is born. Because you didn't give to be used. You gave to be seen, to be valued, to be chosen. But the mistake wasn't in giving. The mistake was thinking your worth was in how much you offered rather than how you positioned yourself. Always being available to many people means having no boundaries. And in a world governed by subtle power dynamics, those who don't set boundaries don't command respect. Remember that time you said yes when you wanted to say no, or were there for someone who later forgot you without remorse. It wasn't your kindness that betrayed you. It was your lack of strategy in showing it. Constant presence without calculated absence kills desire. And you were pure presence. You were there before being called. You helped without being asked. And without realizing it, you became a functional extension of others, not a being with your own weight. And this is where Machiavelli comes in, not as the villain history caricatures, but as the thinker who understood a painful truth. Respect is not born of affection, but of the perception of power. And power is nothing more than the ability to control when you are there and when you are not, when you give and when you withdraw. You gave always. You never withdrew. And in the unconscious mind of those around you, that placed you in a position of emotional servitude, not because you were, but because you didn't know how to mark the line between where your giving ends and your value begins. The world doesn't discard good people out of cruelty. It does so out of habit. Because the good, when they don't know how to protect themselves, become part of the background. And the background, however beautiful, is not missed until it disappears. This chapter is not meant to make you stop being you. It's meant to help you understand that being you without awareness of the game is what makes you expendable. Respect is not begged for, it's built. And it begins with understanding that your presence must be a choice, not a guarantee, an impact, not a habit, a boundary, not a resignation. Because as long as you believe that giving everything is what makes you valuable, you'll remain invisible to those who only learn to value what they fear losing. They told you being good was enough. That if you were consistent, generous, and accessible, the world would return gratitude for your giving. But no one explained how the collective subconscious really works, how beneath that surface of good intentions lies a brutal system, the emotional hierarchy. Emotional hierarchy is that invisible structure that defines how much someone is worth to others, not by their essence, but by the perception they generate. And in that system, accessibility does not place you at the top. It places you at the bottom. Why? Because in the emotional world, just like in Machiavellian politics, value is directly linked to the ability to retain the power of choice. And those who are always available have surrendered that power. Those who are never desired become tools. Machiavelli didn't write about emotional relationships, but he understood something that applies to every human bond. Being loved does not guarantee permanence. Being feared, or rather, being perceived as irreplaceable, does. But the key word isn't feared in the literal sense. It's irreplaceable, mysterious, desired. And what is desired is never what is abundant. When someone is always there, the brain of the one receiving stops processing it as something valuable. A devastating psychological phenomenon emerges, hedonic adaptation. Once the other person gets used to your presence, your kindness becomes background noise, and over time, it becomes nothing. Think about it. The song you love most, if you play it every day, starts to lose its power. The scent that once amazed you disappears if you live with it. Your mind filters what is always present and only reacts to what appears or disappears. That's how the world ends up discarding good people, not because they aren't valued, but because their unconditional giving deactivates the mechanism of desire. And in an environment governed by the emotional laws of supply and demand, what doesn't require effort has no impact. As cruel as it may seem, this process is not always conscious. People don't wake up thinking, I'm going to ignore the one who gives me everything. They just do it, because the system that regulates our emotions favors scarcity, what requires effort, what demands attention. And here enters another Machiavellian dimension: utility. Humans, even if they don't admit it, tend to relate based on benefit. Not necessarily material benefit, but emotional, symbolic, or functional. And when you give without conditions, without pause, without limits, the other person doesn't have to do anything to keep you. They don't invest, don't make an effort, only receive. And the brain, when it doesn't register effort, doesn't activate gratitude. It activates habit. And habit, like anything in excess, becomes boring, exhausting, draining. Then comes the silent discard. No guilt, no drama. One day they don't respond the same. One day the message goes unanswered. Another day, someone else takes your place. And you ask yourself, what did I do wrong? But you didn't do anything wrong. You did everything, too much. And you did it without strategy. Machiavelli defended the idea that the prince should learn not to always be good, but to appear good when it suited him. Why? Because the one who gives everything ends up defenseless. And you, in your purity, were noble, but naive. You were needed, but not rare. And in the ruthless logic of desire, that made you easily replaceable. Excessive accessibility creates an inverted kind of power. It doesn't strengthen your place in others' lives, it weakens it. Because what doesn't impose presence leaves no mark. And what leaves no mark disappears without resistance. And you know what's most devastating? The more ignored you feel, the more you try to give. You think the problem is that you didn't do enough. So you double your effort, become more available, more attentive, kinder, but that only accelerates your disappearance. The cycle is perverse. You give, you're ignored. You give more, you're discarded, and no one tells you, no one warns you that your kindness, in that format, is seen as weakness. That total, unpaused giving becomes a trap built by your own hands. This chapter is an invitation to break that logic, to look at reality with the eyes of someone who is tired of being background, to understand that the solution is not to stop being good, but to learn when to disappear in order to be valued again. And most importantly, to understand that respect is born from what is not easily obtained, because the one who is always there is the first to be forgotten. If the emotional world worked by the rules of idealism, good people would always win. Kindness would be recognized. Generosity would be applauded. Love would be enough. But that doesn't happen because human beings, even in their most intimate relationships, respond less to morality than to perception. And Machiavelli understood this perfectly. In his most famous work, The Prince, he didn't try to build a just world. He explained how the real world works. No sugarcoating, no fantasies, no moral obligations, just raw survival strategy. And one of his most brutal truths is this: it is safer to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. This does not mean becoming a tyrant or being cruel for pleasure. It means that respect doesn't grow from affection. It grows from boundaries, from image control, from the management of distance, from the art of maintaining mystery. What Machiavelli described in political leadership is reflected daily in human dynamics. Relationships where the one who controls the rhythm dominates the connection, where the one who knows when to appear and when to withdraw generates more desire than the one who never leaves, where strategic absence is worth more than constant presence. And you were the one who never left, the one who always responded, the one who was there even when not called, the one who, instead of regulating their presence, gave everything until they lost their value. Machiavelli wasn't interested in being fair. He was interested in being lucid, and his lucidity led him to detect what few want to admit. The perception of power is more powerful than actual power, because others don't respond to your essence. They respond to how they perceive your essence. And if they perceive you as someone who doesn't set boundaries, who's always available, who gives without measure, then even if you are valuable, you won't seem valuable. And what doesn't seem valuable is discarded without guilt. This is where psychology comes in. Our minds are not designed to admire what is always within reach. They're designed to protect against loss and only value intensely what is perceived as unstable, scarce, fragile. What can be lost? Machiavelli knew this. The ruler who appears unpredictable, not erratic, but calculated, retains control. The one who reveals all his cards loses, and you, by always showing your availability, gave away your strategy. Emotional power doesn't lie in how much you give. It lies in how much you can withdraw without breaking the connection. It lies in your ability to make yourself missed without hurting, to disappear without punishment, to be present without being consumed. That is the Machiavellian paradox. The one who wants to be indispensable must know how to be absent. And that is not achieved by being less authentic. It is achieved by being more conscious. If you don't manage the perception others have of you, they will build it for you, and almost always they will build it downward. because the human brain is wired to exploit what is easily available and to ignore what doesn't require effort. So, how do you apply this without becoming a mask? By understanding that your essence doesn't have to change, but your strategy does. That your kindness shouldn't disappear, but its urgency should be hidden. That your giving shouldn't die, but it must learn to be conditional. The world isn't fair, but it's not blind either. When you position yourself wisely, the same kindness that was once ignored becomes magnetic. The key is not to fake coldness, but to learn how to sustain your silence, to say no without guilt, to withdraw without anger, to regulate your presence so your absence speaks as well. Because in a world saturated with emotional noise, the one who knows when to be silent makes more impact than the one who never leaves. Machiavelli didn't write about you, but if he had, he would have said this: be good, but not predictable. Be noble, but not visible all the time. Be yourself, but learn how to protect yourself. Because the one who doesn't control their image loses their power, and the one who loses their power ends up forgotten, no matter how much they gave. You did it with love, with desire, with sincerity. There was no calculation, no hidden agenda, just the genuine impulse to care, to help, to be there. And yet, you're reading this because something went wrong. Because despite giving everything, they stopped needing you, or worse, they made you feel like you were never needed at all. Sound familiar? That friend you always listened to, who disappeared when it was your turn to speak. That partner who one day stopped looking at you the same, even though you never stopped loving. That family member who only reaches out when they need something and forgets you the rest of the time. That boss who took advantage of your availability but never acknowledged your real worth. These stories aren't rare. They are the hidden cost of giving without strategy. And when they happen, they don't just leave a void. They leave a wound that's hard to name, a mix of rage and sadness, of shame and confusion. How is it possible that what you did with such love made you invisible? The answer lies deeper. The place from which you give. When you give to build connection, but the other only sees functionality, breaks the balance. You believe you're creating a bond. The other is just taking advantage, and not always with malice, often out of habit. The line between love and usefulness is thin, and when you don't draw the line, the other won't see it. This is especially devastating in romantic relationships. Giving without stopping, always being there, trying to anticipate everything the other needs, may seem like the path to their heart. But many times, it's the road to oblivion. Because desire cannot survive where there is no mystery, and admiration doesn't grow where there are no boundaries. The one who never says no loses the weight of their yes. The one who is always available stops being chosen because they're already guaranteed, and you didn't want to be a guarantee. You wanted to be a living presence, to be felt, not assumed. But no one teaches us this. No one tells us that mismanaged goodness is perceived as emotional weakness. That giving without pause creates fatigue, not gratitude. That being indispensable requires distance, not insistence. In family dynamics, this pattern becomes even more cruel. The son who always cares for the parents but is never asked how he feels. The mother who gives everything and is then treated as if she were invisible. The sibling who carries, who fixes, who saves, until they break, and no one notices. because people quickly grow used to those who don't complain, to those who always say, "I can," to those who never set a limit. And then, without realizing it, you begin to disappear from the emotional memory of others. You remain in their lives, yes, but as part of the background. They seek you, but don't see you. They need you, but don't care for you. They mention you, but don't think of you. It's a slow kind of death, not physical, but psychological. A gradual erosion of the place you once held until you're no longer there, even though you are. And you know what's worse? When you finally decide to set boundaries, when you say, "Enough," many react as if you're the villain. "What happened to you?" they ask, as if your new firmness were a betrayal, as if your exhaustion had no right to exist, because they had boxed you in. You were the good one, the one who never breaks, the one who never complains, the one who always gives. And now that you try to reclaim your space, it hurts. It hurts you. It hurts them. But it's necessary. This chapter isn't here to make you hate those who failed you. It's here to help you understand the invisible logic that allowed it. Because only when you recognize how you got lost can you begin to find yourself again. The solution isn't to become hardened. It's to learn to dose. To understand that your emotional presence must carry weight, not through artificial scarcity, but through conscious value. Every yes you give must come from your center, not from your fear of abandonment. Every act of kindness from your genuine desire, not from your need to be accepted. Because when you give from emptiness, you only receive emptiness. And when you give without demand, you receive without care. It's not about becoming cold. It's about no longer being transparent. If you want to be seen, you must stop being obvious. If you want to be valued, you must first learn to withdraw. Only then will you break that broken mirror that made you believe giving everything would make you eternal. Emotional eternity is not built with excess. It is built with impact. And impact requires pause, selective presence, and well-chosen silence. You weren't born to become hardened. You didn't come into this world to play the game of coldness, to become distant, to fake a detachment you don't feel, because that is not your essence. Your essence is to feel, to care, to give. But now you understand something you didn't see before. Your light, if you don't learn to modulate it, will end up blinding both you and everyone else. Being good is not the problem. It never was. The problem was confusing goodness with the absence of limits. Believing that love meant always being there. Believing that to be valued, you had to be useful, docile, unconditional. And that idea broke you. It made you walk through life offering infinite versions of yourself, hoping one of them would be enough. But the one who gives without measure dissolves. And no one respects what doesn't feel solid. Now it's time for something different, not to stop being who you are, but to reclaim your right to be good from a place of power. What does that mean? It means you can still be empathetic, but not free territory for others' emotional invasions. You can still be there, but not always. You can still give, but not everything. You can still love, but also walk away if that love erases you. Strategic kindness is not a betrayal of your authenticity. It's an evolution of your awareness. It's looking at the world as it is and deciding, with full clarity, how and when to offer the best of yourself. Because not everyone deserves your full version. Not every extended hand is reaching to hold you. Some just want to take. And you are not here to empty yourself in every encounter. Some people only learn to value you once you're gone. Some bonds only reveal their truth when you retreat, and some spaces only heal when you stop filling them. Calculated presence is not coldness, it's self-respect. Chosen silence is not indifference, it's preservation. And boundaries are not walls. They are doors you choose when to open. The key is to reverse the axis, to stop giving to be accepted and start giving because you accept yourself, to stop seeking belonging and start inhabiting yourself, to stop waiting for approval and start exercising discernment. Because here is the paradox. When you prioritize yourself, you begin to generate the kind of respect you always longed for. When you step back, people start to miss you. When you speak less, your words weigh more. When you show up with intention, not need, your presence becomes magnetic. And then something powerful happens. Your kindness stops being an exploitable resource and becomes a conscious act. Your kindness stops being an exploitable resource and becomes a conscious act. You no longer give from fear, but from abundance. You no longer help to be seen, but because you see yourself. That is power. And if Machiavelli could see you now, he would understand that you didn't choose the game of power out of vanity. You chose it because you were tired of being discarded, because you understood that respect is not requested, it is provoked. But provoking it doesn't require you to become someone else. It only requires you to become a more lucid version of yourself, the version that knows when to be silent, when to step back, when to set a boundary, and when to give, but with the certainty that you can stop giving at any moment. That is your strength, not in hardening, but in becoming selective, not in stopping your feelings, but in no longer giving them away to those who don't know how to receive them. Because kindness, when it is free and conscious, doesn't become disposable. It becomes unforgettable. Maybe now you see it more clearly. It's not about dimming your kindness. It's about no longer using it as a shield, no longer making it an excuse to remain in places where there's no longer room for you. The world can be hostile, yes, but you didn't come to this world to beg for recognition. You came to embody your value, to make yourself seen, not for how much you give, but for who you are even when you give nothing. And if this message spoke not to your mind, but to that silent part of you that was already tired of not being seen, then I invite you to stay. This space is for those who feel deeply, for those who no longer want to be strong out of resignation, but out of awareness. Subscribe if you sense that your power lies not in becoming harder, but in awakening. And leave this in the comments. My kindness will no longer be my cage.